Welcome to DIY Hair School. My name is Jillian. I am a professional hairstylist and I am here to teach you how to do your own hair at home. In today's video, I'm going to be discussing the different types of hair dye and which one is best for your hair. So get comfy because it's a long one. There are four main types of hair dye. There's permanent hair dye, demi-permanent hair dye, semi-permanent hair dye, and temporary hair dye. Which one you need to use depends on what you're trying to achieve and the current condition of your hair. So what do all these different types of hair dye actually do, and which one will be best for your hair? If you haven't already done so, I would suggest going back and watching my first video on everything that you need to know before you dye your hair, and that will help you be prepared to determine what type of hair dye that you're going to need. All right, so let's get into it. Keep in mind that these explanations that I'm going to be giving are very simplified. There's actually a lot more that goes into determining what type of hair dye that your hairdresser might want to use on your hair to achieve your specific goals. But my goal here today is just to give you the most basic information, make it easy to understand so that you can make the most informed decision possible if you're going to be dyeing your own hair at home. So first we have permanent hair dye. This I find is what people most commonly buy, although it's not always what you need. So permanent hair dye has ammonia in it and it's mixed with 20, 30, or 40 volume developer. This type of dye will open up your cuticle, lift out your natural pigment, replace it with whatever tone and color that you have chosen, and then seal those cuticles back up. When it comes to choosing the developer, 20, 30, 40 volume, the developer that you choose will determine how many levels of lift that your hair gets. So a 20 volume developer will give you 1 to 2 levels of lift in your natural color. 30 volume developer will give you 2 to 3 levels lift. And 40 volume, guys, I just don't suggest using 40 volume. I don't use 40 volume on anyone's hair. It's really harsh, it hurts the skin, and it's really damaging to the hair. So I would stick with 20 or 30 volume when you're working with hair dye. For the most part, everyone's going to use 20 volume developer with permanent hair dye. It's your best bet. You need 20 volume if you're going to be covering any gray. The only time that I really use 30 volume developer with a permanent hair dye is if we're doing a high lift red and you're trying to get a really vibrant result. Generally speaking, if I'm going to be lifting the hair any more than 1 to 2 levels, I skip the hair dye and I go straight to bleach anyways. Now you can use permanent hair dye with 10 developer if you are going to just be depositing color and not trying to lift the natural pigment at all. So if you're going darker than your natural hair, you can use a 10 volume developer with a permanent hair dye. However, in this case, my personal preference would be to opt for a demi-permanent dye, as it's a lot more gentle and produces a lot shinier results for my client, or in your case for yourself. So just because permanent hair dye is permanent, this does not mean it won't fade. So it's permanent because it permanently alters the state of your hair. However, over time, those color molecules will shrink, causing the pigment to fade, and the color of your hair will shift. The color that it goes will depend on the undertones of the color that you chose, as well as the underlying pigments that were left behind when your natural pigment was lifted. Permanent hair dye fades for lots of reasons, but the three main reasons that your hair dye will fade are your water. So the chemicals like chlorine and all the minerals in your water are honestly one of the main reasons people's hair dye fades. If you find that you have a significant problem with your dye fading really quickly, and especially if you're already using really good products and things like that, then I would suggest a water filter for your shower. The second thing that will fade your hair dye is obviously lesser quality shampoos and conditioners. The ones that are developed for color treated hair and the professional brands definitely outperform the lower quality drugstore brands. And don't worry, not all professional brand shampoos and conditioners are exorbitantly priced. I can link a few selections down below that are pretty on par with what you would buy at the drugstore, but will perform a lot better on your colored hair. The third thing that will fade your hair dye is heat. Excessive heat on your hair from your blow dryer, your curling iron, your flat iron, all of those things will cause the color molecules to shrink faster and that pigment to fade. So just make sure you use a really good quality heat protectant that protects up to 450 degrees in your hair every time that you use heat on it. So keep in mind with permanent hair dye that even if the color did fade so that it was no longer noticeable and you feel like you no longer have dye in your hair, permanent hair dye is permanently altered your hair. It is always there. So it will always be something that you have to contend with when dyeing your hair or doing any other chemical processes in the future, unless it has been cut out of your hair completely. Permanent hair dye is definitely, aside from bleach, the most harsh dye that we're going to discuss today. That is because it contains ammonia, and you typically are using higher level volume peroxides with it than with some of the other colors that we're going to discuss today. So when you're deciding whether or not you are going to use permanent hair dye, you need to consider, are you trying to go a shade or two lighter than your natural hair? If so, then you are going to need to use permanent hair dye. If you're trying to go a really vibrant shade, reds, red violets, things like that, then you probably want to go with a permanent hair dye. It's going to give you the most vibrant results. Or if you are trying to cover gray hairs, then you definitely want to choose permanent hair dyes and look for a brand that offers 100% gray coverage. So next we have demi-permanent hair dyes. So demi-permanent hair dyes are either low ammonia or some are ammonia free. They are always mixed with a 10 developer down to a 0 level developer. Demi-permanent hair dye does not alter your natural hair at all. It simply deposits color over top of it. So because of this, you cannot lighten your hair at all with a demi-permanent hair dye. Demi-permanent hair dye lifts your cuticle slightly and allows the color to sit just under the surface of your hair. This leaves your hair super soft and shiny. Demi-permanent hair dyes will likely need a refresher after approximately 20 washes. This type of dye is perfect for going darker than what you already have or for adding tone. Adding tone means adding a reddish tone or a violet tone to your brown hair, or using a violet or an ash toner over top of your pre-lightened hair to get the shade of blonde that you're going for. You just always need to remember that when picking a demi-permanent hair dye to add tone to your hair, you want to make sure that you are using the same level as the hair that you're covering or lower. If you're not sure what level means and you don't know the natural level of your hair or the hair that you're trying to cover up, you can go back to the previous video where I explain it in a little bit more detail. Demi-permanent hair dye is a great way to freshen up old color. You can put it over top of your faded permanent hair dye. You can pick the same shade or one that's slightly different and just add back that vibrancy and shine to the color without all the damage that permanent hair dye could possibly cause on your hair. Demi-permanent hair dye will fade out slowly because it does not go all the way into your hair shaft and just sits under the surface. It will take a lot longer to fade out the more vibrant of a shade you use. So reds, for example, and coppers will tend to fade out completely a lot slower. If you've put it over pre-lightened bleached hair, it also might not completely ever fade out, as the structure of bleached hair acts a little bit differently than your natural hair or your permanently dyed hair. And so that demi-permanent hair dye can almost stick a little bit more like a permanent over top of a bleached hair. Keep in mind, demi-permanent hair dye will not cover gray. You can put demi-permanent hair dye over your gray hairs if you want to soften the look and blend them a little bit, but it will not cover those grays and it will fade out of gray hair very quickly. Semi-permanent hair dyes, also called direct dyes sometimes. These are the dyes that come straight out of the tube and don't get mixed with anything and just go straight onto your hair. Most often when we're using these dyes, they're in fun, vibrant colors like blue, green, pink, purple, teal, all those fun colors of the rainbow that everyone just loves to put in their hair. Semi-permanent hair dye sits right on top of the surface of your hair and it does not change your natural hair at all. It doesn't lift your cuticle even a little bit. It just simply deposits color right over top of your hair. This is why it fades out so fast and can sometimes have color transfer onto things like your pillow, your towels, and whatnot when your hair is wet. If you're choosing a semi-permanent hair dye to put over top of your hair, you want to consider the canvas, which is your hair in this case. So because these colors cannot alter your natural hair, it's only going to show up if the hair is light enough. A lot of color brands will have charts available online showing which colors will show up best on which levels of hair. And for a lot of them, you're going to need to bleach your hair if you want those bright, vibrant results. If you don't want to bleach your hair, you're going to have the best results the lighter your hair naturally is. If your hair is a bit on the darker side, some of the colors may add a little bit of tone to your natural hair, but if your hair is pretty dark, most semi-permanent hair dyes aren't going to do anything at all. Something really important to keep in mind with semi-permanent hair dyes is that even though a lot of them will fade out completely and you won't see them anymore, most of them do leave a stain inside on your cuticles where you can't see it. This will become apparent when you apply bleach or anything else down the road, and it starts to pull all that pigment out, and all those pigments that were hiding inside your hair will start to come out. So keep in mind that even though these colors are very temporary seeming, often they will have more permanent lasting ramifications. You should always opt for a color remover over bleach to remove semi-permanent hair dye from your hair, as a color remover is designed specifically to take the pigments that are on your hair and pull them off, whereas bleach's job is to get into your cuticle, open it up, penetrate deep in there and pull out any pigment, and in that process it can actually drive those color molecules, those pink or blue or whatever they are, deeper into your hair shaft, making that stain a lot more permanent and resulting in a very expensive color correction at the hair salon. I cannot stress enough how important it is when you choose a semi-permanent dye to pick a good quality salon brand, one that a hairstylist would use in their chair at the salon. The reason for this is the lower quality brands, two of them that are very popular being Manic Panic and Splat, are made of much lower quality ingredients than a lot of the salon brands, and it makes them a lot more like a stain than a true semi-permanent hair dye. Because these lower quality dyes act as a stain, it will not only stain your hair, it will stain your shower, your skin, your clothes, and continue to just leach off of the hair in excessive amounts over time. But it also will likely be very difficult, if not impossible, for some people to get out of their hair, because even though the color itself, the molecules may come off of the hair, you'll be left with a very faded stain, especially if you've put it over top of bleached hair. Instead, you want to stick to a good quality, professional brand, true semi-permanent hair dye. Some of these are like Joico Color Intensity. Guy Tang has some great ones. Pravana. I can link links to these below, and the best thing is some of these are actually cheaper than some of their lower quality counterparts. Now, I do have a lot of clients complain that some of the more professional brands of semi-permanent dye fade faster than something like a Splat, and this is true, but this is because they are not leaving behind that stain and because these semi-permanent dyes are performing the way that they want to perform. But your hair will thank you in the future, and if you're the type of person that likes to change your hair color often, you really want to stick to the better quality products because it's going to be a lot easier to bounce from color to color with very minimal damage. I do have people ask all the time if the lower quality semi-permanent hair dyes will damage their hair. The answer is no. There's nothing in them that is going to be harmful to your hair. The damage comes when trying to remove them later on because they're so stubborn and difficult to get out. They also won't add anything to your hair. They're very, very basic in their ingredients, and a professional semi-permanent hair dyes typically have a lot of conditioning agents and things in it that will make your hair nice and shiny, and that just makes the color feel so much more supple and vibrant. So depending on the brand that you choose, the quality of your hair when you use it, and how you take care of your semi-permanent hair dye, the color typically will last you in good quality color for about 10 to 15 washes. Some things you can do to make the semi-permanent hair dyes last longer is you can use cool water, you can shampoo only once or twice a week. Definitely use a shampoo that is made for vibrant colored hair. And don't use heat, or use as little as possible, and always use a really good quality heat protectant because heat will fade those vibrant colors so fast, because remember, they're just on the surface of your hair and that heat will just pull off all those color molecules. So finally, we have temporary hair dyes. Temporary hair dyes are the hair dyes that wash out in one wash. These are things like those colorful hairsprays that you can get, hair chalk, or those root touch-up sprays for in between when you do your gray roots. Just like with the semi-permanent hair dyes, you're best to stick with a reputable brand when it comes to buying these types of products. For example, my son wanted to have lime green hair for some school spirit day, and he told me the night before, so I just went to the drugstore and got whatever I could find instead of the brand I would normally find at my beauty supplier, and I figured it's just temporary colored spray, how bad could it be? Sprayed his hair in the morning. It's a beautiful, vibrant green color. The color was amazing. He was thrilled. It lasted all day long. We washed his hair that night, and oh my goodness, he had green hair for months. I mean, the majority of it on the surface came off, but his hair was stained a horrible, ugly, muddy green color, basically until I cut it out several months later. So lesson learned, stick with the professional brand temporary hair dyes. Usually I use a Joico color spray when I put color on kids' hair for fun, and it comes out at bath time, no problem. So I can link some of those fun temporary products below as well. When you're choosing a temporary root spray to cover up those gray roots between when you dye or when you go to the salon, you want to always stick with a darker color than you might think you need, because it's going to show up a little bit lighter if it's going on really gray hair. And even if it doesn't and it's a little darker than the rest of your hair, it always looks better if your roots are darker than the rest of your hair than if they're lighter or really orange. So even though bleach isn't really categorized as a type of hair dye, I decided to add it into this video as a bonus because I know that most people want to know about it. Bleach is mixed with developer, usually a 20 or a 30 volume, to lift out the natural pigments of your hair. And that's all it does. Bleach doesn't make you blonde per se. Bleach just lifts out the natural pigments and makes you a lighter level. This is why you should always use a toner, because not only will toner tone out any unwanted underlying pigments such as orange or yellow, but it will also seal that cuticle back down and leave the hair feeling a lot softer and shinier. Even if your hair comes out the perfect shade with just the bleach, you love the color that you lifted to, you don't mind whatever pigments are left behind. Personally, I still use a clear demi-permanent hair dye over top of someone's bleached hair, because that just seals that cuticle and makes those hair strands nice and shiny, and you don't get that dry, straw bleached look. If you're trying to go more than 2 levels lighter than your natural hair, I always suggest bleach to do this. If you're trying to make any hair that has been previously dyed a slightly lighter shade, even if it's only 1 level lighter than it currently is, you will need to lift out some of that pigment first with bleach, because hair dye does not lift hair dye. It will only lift your natural hair. So in that case, you would use the bleach to lift out some of that pigment, and then you would replace it with a demi-permanent hair dye in the shade that you want. You just always want to make sure that you've lifted to the level that you need, or 1 level lighter than the color that you want to go. Using bleach at home, I suggest never using higher than a 20 volume. I know a lot of people use 30 volume, but let me tell you this, the difference between 20 volume and 30 volume with bleach is not how light your hair is going to get. It's simply how fast it's going to get that light. When used properly, 20 volume developer mixed with a good quality bleach will get your hair just as light as a 30 volume. It's just going to take a little bit longer. You just need to be patient. Some things you can do to ensure that the 20 volume developer will get you as light as you want to go. You always want to make sure you saturate the hair fully. And I mean like tons and tons and tons of bleach, okay? The hair should not feel dry at all. You also want to protect that bleach while it's processing. You don't want to let any of it dry out, because dry bleach stops working. So get yourself some cheap shower caps from the dollar store and secure it over top of all of your bleached hair while it's processing. And then just take your time, do it in sections, and just keep an eye on it. One tip is that the bleach always looks lighter while the bleach is on the hair. So before you get anxious and rinse it off because you feel like it looks white, take 1 strand of hair and completely wipe that bleach off, and you'll get a better idea. Usually that color is still a lot more yellow than you want, and it just looks really light with that bleach still on it. So always check before you rinse. So I'm just going to say it one more time. Yes, 30 volume will lift your hair faster, but the faster that you lift your hair with bleach, the less control you have, and the less control that you have, the more likely that you are to damage your hair and be one of those poor girls on YouTube whose hair is just coming out in clumps. And you don't want to be that person, because that is so hard to fix. You're in for a big haircut, and it's just not going to be the hair goals that you had in mind. Okay, so that is everything for today's video. Thanks for sticking with me, guys. I know that was a ton of information. Make sure you subscribe and hit that notification button so that you don't miss any of my upcoming videos. And leave a comment below if there's anything that you didn't understand in this video today. I will be sure to answer any questions that you have in the comments, or let me know if you have an idea for one of my upcoming videos. I will be happy to make a video addressing any questions that you guys have. See you guys next time on DIY Hair School.
Bye.